can you turn your music down, please? Because I'm having a really hard time.
Whatever. Yeah, sure, man. Yeah, I'll just turn right down. Sorry.
Thank you.
Do you expect me to talk?
Hello and welcome to episode 190 of Do You Expect Us to Talk? I'm your host Becca, and as always joined by my fellow co-hosts Chris and Dave. How are you both?
Good evening, folks.
I'm feeling alright, thank you very much.
Good to know. I'm missing your witty repartee.
Well, you know, I'm trying to upgrade myself.
Ah,
I hope you don't have any parasites.
that's
Yes.
made me think of something that we totally didn't talk about for 10 minutes before we hit record.
We'll have to compare and contrast.
That sounds like a cue for some padding, I think.
Yeah, well, that's all right. This film is a bit thin, so if only there was another film with an almost identical premise and Tom Hardy alike in it.
They do look quite similar.
From a now more lauded director.
Maybe we'll be covering that tonight.
I mean, we say this film's a bit thin, but part of me sort of likes it because so many films these days are like over the two hour mark. It's I actually forgot when coming to watching this, it's like, holy shit, this is 90 minutes.
By the time you throw all the credits and bollocks on, it's about 112.
Yeah.
No, sorry, 102 rather, I think.
And
it goes to credits on about 91 or something.
And I paused it for holy shit, it's only like about 90 minutes, and it's like had like 20 minutes of credits, forgetting that it had the teaser for the next film we'll be doing, which the multiverse, the Spider-Man multiverse film.
It had a teaser for that, did it? I didn't get that far.
Yeah.
I saw the Cletus Cassidy one, but we'll get to that. We'll come to all that when we obviously talk through the film. So we are now beyond the sort of Spider-Man films, and we're into the sort of Spider-Verse, one might term it.
Into the
films.
Spider-Verse.
Basically, Sony still owns Spider-Man, but they've sort of outsourced making the main Spider-Man films to Marvel, and they share the profits. So it's Kevin Feige's team and everything else that has all the creative control over that. But they obviously want to exploit the property. Sony are lacking properties, as evidenced by the fact they keep trying to bring back Men in Black and shit like that. So they've done these sort of spin-offs, and obviously Venom, it's no great surprise Venom is the first one out of the gate. We're still expecting Morbius at some point with Jared Leto, but obviously this week and next week we sort of round off this sort of series with the two sort of spin-offs that are purely under the Sony label as opposed to Marvel, although obviously they are still Marvel characters. So what are we covering tonight, Becca?
So yes, no surprise that tonight we are covering Venom, starring Tom Hardy, Michelle Williams, Riz Ahmed, Woody Harrelson, Scott Hayes, Jenny Slate, Reed Scott, and a whole bunch of other people. Score by David Jorgensen, Venom created by Todd McFarlane and David Michelini, whose name I can't pronounce. Script by Jeff Pinkner, Scott Rosenberg, Kelly Marcel, and Will Bill. Directed by Ruben Fleischer and released in 2018.
Yeah, Todd McFarlane, I believe, also created Spawn.
He did indeed. I think that's kind of where I heard that name before. I was like, he sounds familiar, and that's why.
Spawn was done as I can't remember who was in it, but it was like a low-budget 97 film, something like that. But it's one of those films that, in an alternate universe, instead of like Blade kicking off this whole sort of epoch, it could have been Spawn if it had been a bigger budget film, or somebody like a Norrington or Del Toro or something making it. Spawn, there's still a great film to be made out of Spawn. There's a little bit of sort of Spider-Man about it, there's a little bit of the Punisher about it, there's a little bit of Ghost Rider about it, there's a lot of little sort of...
Yes, a big amalgamation.
Yeah, a little bit of Batman. It's a very sort of dark adult take on a sort of superhero with a bit of tragedy mixed in, and Spawn could be kind of interesting, but you can see Venom is from the same sort of creed, although it was part of the sort of mainstream Spider-Man universe. I think I've said this in one of the previous shows, but if you just want a quick rejoiner on sort of Venom done pretty much right, dialogue's terrible, but go watch the 90s cartoon. It's a first season episode. Well, it's three-parter, I think. I think it might be called the Symbiote Suit or something like that. The three-parter, but it's the whole Venom story.
I've started watching the animated series. I started going through the first few episodes, and it's actually pretty good. I mean, bear in mind it is a cartoon, and he has to like talk through everything all the time. But it goes through all like sort of the characters and sort of like I was impressed. Like obviously they decided not to go with Gwen Stacy. I think, but they sort of introduce Felicia Harding as like a love interest. But they kind of like, it's a good thing about doing like an episodic cartoon because it can introduce like Mary Jane, and then like the episode before Mary Jane's introduced, Aunt May saying like, "Oh, I need to get you that set you up that date with that nice new girl, MJ," or like that. So it's even then MJ's talked about before you even seen her, and she's therefore introduced in the next episode as.
You can tease things, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think it's got quite the multifaceted nature of the Batman animated series.
No.
There's things about the Batman animated series I'm not that fond of, in that I have always had a slightly... I don't really like the design of Batman himself in it, the costuming and stuff. I've always had an irrational hatred of the yellow ellipse on the chest anyway. But there's few things in it I'm not that fond of, but just the depth of it. You go and watch something like Heart of Ice and the Two-Face episodes and stuff, and they really are aimed at almost an adult audience. In fact, I remember years ago when I was dating someone who had a child, and I put on Batman the Animated Series for him, and within a couple of minutes I decided to switch it off and find something younger. Whereas I think Spider-Man is much more made for kids, but they're of the same ilk in that over its run of 60, 80 episodes, whatever it is in each case, they really do show you the whole rogues gallery and a completely cohesive universe for that character. It's pretty good, but it's quite a handy way to see how Venom was meant to be.
It's because you get introduced to like these characters and they reoccur, so you get introduced to Eddie Brock, and he's just like a character that's in the background, consistently, and you have like other characters like Flash Thompson and things like that, and while they're not like the main or always part of the main story each time, they kind of like continue on, and it just adds depth, and you kind of like by the time they decide to do anything more major, like with Eddie Brock, with the Venom, all the sort of groundwork's already done. It's all ready to go, and you don't have, and you can just sort of get on with things a bit more, and it's you not have this completely just we have to introduce Eddie Brock and then it has to do this and to do that before you even get remotely anything the Venom suit. Do you know what I mean? So.
And again, it's because it's episodic. You do get different villains each week, and they sort of circle round, and you see them again. And it's nice like that. If you get a villain you don't like, tune into the next one. You'll get
somebody you like this time.
It gives everyone. You get the various goblins. You get the Hobgoblin at some point as well as the Green Goblin. You get all of them
first as well. I think
you get the Hobgoblin first. Yeah. I've seen it all at some point, and. It does definitely. There's a bit of early CG in it as well, in some of the city design, but it also takes some of that slightly noirish feel from the Batman animated series just in the city design. If I've got one problem with it, I've said it in another week. They animate Peter and Spider-Man far too big and bulky. But apart from that, it's Spider-Man as it's meant to be done. I would recommend the 90s series. I grew up with the 80s version first off. I think it's 1981, something like that. And that's the version that went into Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends with Firestar and Iceman, I think he was called. I don't think they were comic book characters. I think it was made for the show. But
I've never heard of those before.
Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends is on Disney Plus. If you want to give it a look, I haven't yet. So when I picture Peter Parker, I sort of picture that version first because I think that was the first Spider-Man I was ever I ever got to see. But as for Venom, before we sort of go into the film, I think it's worth just talking about that cartoon. So in that canon, Venom was a symbiote brought back inadvertently on a space shuttle flown by J. Jonah Jameson's son, who we met in Spider-Man 2 as Mary Jane's fiance. I got a feeling he's the only one who survives the crash in the cartoon. And eventually the symbiote bonds with Peter Parker. And very like Spider-Man 3, he wakes up sort of upside down at night looking at his reflection in a window. And he's like, how the hell did I end up here? And he's in a black suit. And over time, that suit becomes influential on his behaviour. He becomes a little bit more violent and a bit more direct in what we must remember as a kid's cartoon. And to cut a long story short, he ends up separated from the symbiote. The symbiote does not like loud noises, much like in Spider-Man 3. Bonds with Eddie Brock. Again, sort of covered in Spider-Man 3. And so he's taken Spider-Man's abilities and melded it with Eddie Brock's strength, because Eddie Brock's a little bit of a big bruiser. And so, yeah, he was already stronger in the black suit anyway. His webbing was quicker, more natural, stronger.
Yeah, he didn't run out of webbing, so he didn't have that problem anymore. And
yeah, so bonding with Eddie Brock, you've got a stronger version of Spider-Man bonded to like a bodybuilder. So Venom was always a stronger, more morally ambiguous version of Spider-Man, basically. Have I been fair on all of that? And then there've been various spin-offs and symbiotes over time, like Carnage and so on.
Yeah,
that's really useful to know, because I think even though I was like into sort of like cartoons and animation, like totally growing up and in my teens, I somehow seem to have missed like animated Spider-Man, animated Batman. I only recently came across like the classic Superman cartoons from back in the day.
From Fleischer, yeah, they're all on Amazon Prime at the moment.
Yeah,
in
that's
the UK.
probably why. But yeah, no, I picked up a box set recently, which was amazing. And I just kind of felt like I was, watching a piece of comic book history, and that sounds a bit strange, but
they're like tone poems set to music.
they are. They're literally, the artwork is fantastic. They're
very
much of the
influential.
era.
When you watch Batman the animated series and see like even the title cards, you'll see how heavily influenced by Fleischer it is.
Yeah, I've seen like a few like clips and images and things like that as well, and I can definitely see the influence there. And it kind of looks kind of very like gothic and sort of very 30s, 40s kind of influence.
And some of the team that created Batman the animated series went on to create Superman the animated series in the second half of the 90s, and that's pretty good too. Yeah. Tonally much lighter, but again, plenty of episodes to go through most of the Rogues Gallery and a sort of retelling of a lot of the lore.
Yeah, but definitely to seek them out for sure.
The biggest problem I envisaged when we were going to get a Venom film distinct from with no Spider-Man in it is so much of the look, ability, skills, and everything else of Venom is literally derived from having bonded with Peter Parker. So I did wonder what this Venom would be. And effectively, they don't really have him swinging; they just have him doing the climbing bits, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, there's parts with like with the suit itself like flies out and things like that. And think, but I think they do pretty much as much as they can do without having to establish Peter Parker. Really, I mean, obviously he can't do the webs. He hasn't got like the spider symbol on his chest. But I think everything else is kind of there. It's just kind of accepted that is like the true form of the symbiote, really.
Yeah, I mean the head design is like bang on what I would picture Venom to be. Even much more, more so than the 2007 version, although they got the look of that okay. Yeah, so what else to say? Cinematographer for the film, Matthew Libatek. looking through, he's done a lot of. He worked with Joel Schumacher a fair bit, so Tigerland and Phone Booth and stuff like that. He's worked with Darren Aronofsky a few times, and again, whilst anyone who knows me knows I'm not a Darren Aronofsky fan, his films look really nice, always. You know, The Fountain is mental, but it's a beautiful looking film. Black Swan is a beautiful looking film. Worked with Jon Favreau, so he did the first couple of Iron Man films. He did Cowboys and Aliens. And most recently in the comic book universe worked on Birds of Prey as well. Ludwig Göransson, we've covered his work with both Creed and the Creed sequel, but he also did Black Panther. So there's a little bit of...
there's a through line there, isn't there?
There's a through line of, like, they've got a bit of a sort of comic book history and decent comic book films as well. And he's currently just done the score for Tenet, the Christopher Nolan film.
That's going to look and sound amazing. I really cannot wait.
The more unpredictable link is probably the director, Ruben Fleischer, because he did both Zombieland films, which are well thought of, but he also did Gangster Squad, which is really nothing.
I haven't seen either of them, unfortunately. With this director, I'm not familiar with any of his work, unfortunately. I'm really not very cine literate with this film at all, unfortunately.
No, he's currently filming Uncharted with Tom Holland, another Spider-Man link. Uncharted.
Fun fact, folk.
Uncharted has been a game of pass the parcel around different directors, though. So
it has, yeah. That's going to be interesting when that comes out. Definitely.
I can't see that ever being resembling anything like the Uncharted games, because it's Nathan Drake as a youngster. It's like, well, it's not.
Yeah, it's not going to resemble the games, is it? It's going to be kind of a very, very kind of poor facsimile.
Yeah, it just seems like an odd thing, because in many ways it's like computer game movies never seem to have worked.
No, they didn't always translate very well to the screen, do they? So,
but with something like this, you think like, well, surely you can just like knock off like a basic version of any game, and you should be alright. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's because the games themselves are play like a movie anyway.
They're quite cinematic. Like some of the cut scenes are really cinematic.
I've not played any of them because I haven't had a PlayStation since the second generation of PlayStation.
Yeah.
And they're PS exclusives. So I've never played them, but I've seen footage, I've seen like in-depth reviews. I've got a feel for what the universe is. I've always said that the reason we've not had decent decent video game adaptations is the level of talent involved in making them. You know, if you took the people that have made traditionally video game adaptations, if that was the level of talent that had been making comic book films, they wouldn't be any good either. I think the one issue with Uncharted is it's very, very heavily influenced by Indiana Jones anyway, so it might come out looking like a bit of a knockoff anyway.
That is the problem anyway, isn't it? But
yeah,
in video games you accept those weaknesses.
Though that being said, like, would anyone begrudge enough? Because we're not getting any Indiana Jones films at the moment, so
that's going to be the next best thing, isn't it? I think.
So, yes.
I wouldn't mind at all. And there's enough room for interplay between him and the Sully character to do something with that. I've got a feeling Mark Wahlberg might be playing the Sully character. There's talk of because it is younger, isn't it? Yeah, Mark Wahlberg's playing Sully. Obviously, had this been made by David O. Russell back in the day, he would have played Nathan Drake. Antonio.
Yeah, that would have been fantastic. He would have been, really well cast, I think.
I don't know. I think so. It's Nathan Drake's so characterized to a certain degree. I think that's a problem. He's so characterized, like in. I
suppose,
game.
He's quite iconic, isn't he? I guess.
And people would any fans of the game would be like, no, it has to be Nathan Fillion, but then he's a bit too old now.
A bit too old and a bit too
he's
heavy.
A bit aged out,
to be rude, but he's not. He'd have to seriously get in shape in it, and he's arguably too old anyway. So if you want to make a series,
unless they did like Nathan Drake the later years, maybe if they want to make a sequel further on down the line rather than go and follow the prequel route, I don't know. That was going to be
my next point. What studio is it? And Sony. There you go. My reason for saying that was I wouldn't be surprised if it's Sony, because Sony are lacking properties. So you can see why they've gone young. They want a series out of this.
Yeah, they want something they can develop again and again.
So we'll see. But yeah, so when Ruben Fleischer came to this, my first thought was, this may not be anything special, but it might be pretty serviceable. And then I heard Tom Hardy was involved, so I thought, well, Tom Hardy's not necessarily a mark of quality in that his end product is variable. It's not definitely going to be superb, but you know, that lent it a certain weight. And so I was kind of looking forward to this, but again, it's this compromise of not having the universe, you know, the proper Spider-Man universe tied in.
Yeah, I suppose it's a bit weird, isn't it, having like a Spider-Man film but without Spider-Man, but because it's kind of outside that universe, I guess. Maybe that's why this film is so slight, because you kind of, even though it's from Sony, it's from the Marvel stable, as it were. Maybe it's because you haven't got as many outside influences, you haven't got, you know, it's still very much a collaborative effort, but you haven't got as many executives, you haven't got as many fingers in the pies, saying, oh, you should do this, should do that, should do the other. I don't know. That's just conjecture on my part.
Yeah.
I mean, the sequel's interesting as well to look at, because that's have anyone returning as well. You know, obviously got Woody Allen, Jesus Christ, Woody Harrelson.
Imagine Woody Allen in a symbiote.
Doing it from in France or wherever it is he lives now.
Naomi Harris is going to be in it.
Yeah, she's going to be one of the villains, and directed by Andy Serkis.
Yeah, so it's got a really good cast, a really good production team behind it. You know, I haven't seen Venom now, even though I would agree it's a very slight film. I am perhaps a bit more excited for the sequel.
I did note this. I'd forgotten about this. Robert Richardson's the cinematographer for it. He's probably my favourite working cinematographer at the moment.
He's going to look good.
And I include Roger Deakins in that. Yeah, so we'll just have to see. I don't know who's writing it. Screenplay by Kelly.
It might change somewhere down the line. We don't know.
Kelly Marcel. She wrote 50 Shades of Grey, which ain't so good, but she also wrote Saving Mr. Banks, which is excellent.
Well, it's a brilliant film.
That's on Disney Plus if anyone has not seen it.
If you fancy a Mary Poppins, yeah. Or Bill, that's a perfect film. And because if you go back and read the original books as well, and then you go back and hear the interviews with the original author, I just think Emma Thompson's performance is spot on. She gets a lot of stick, but she delivers.
Emma Thompson's really well thought of.
No, I mean just for this film, just because I remember speaking to a few fans who are like they're kind of quite diehard sort of fans, and they go, "Oh no, she doesn't sound anything like P.L. Travers." Rah, rah, rah. It's like, well, if you go back and listen to the original interviews, which they include, at the end of the film.
I like that. It's like upset.
Yeah, she does really well.
She doesn't sound verbatim like.
Yeah, none of us know her voice apart from the real dialogue.
Well, no, exactly. That's it. And yeah, I think it's really interesting that they do include like the original interviews, because then you can you get more of an appreciation for it rather than just portraying a stuck-up English person. But actually,
if you're looking for close casting, Tom Hanks is nothing like Walt Disney.
Well, no, exactly.
It's a story.
But then he is perfect casting, because you just get Tom Hanks and just be enigmatic and kind of large than life, and it's like great, perfect. Can't think of anyone better.
That's what but you've just backed up exactly what I'm trying to say. You've got the essence of what you're trying to get across in those characters.
That's what you need. That's what you need. And Emma Thompson, it's all about P.L. Travers really at the end of the day. So
it's a great film though. Saving Mr. Banks. It was. I think it might even have been in my top 10 of the decade. I think it was really
definitely yes. You can highly definitely rate that film.
Yeah, it's really good. And I don't think you need to be
the best Mary Poppins film that's been out recently.
It's the best. It's probably the best Mary Poppins film, because the funny thing is,
apart from Mary Poppins,
I'm not a big Mary Poppins fan.
The sequel was okay. It was charming.
I'm not knocking any of it. I'm just saying I'm not personally a big fan, and yet the biggest tribute I can pay Saving Mr. Banks is when it finished, I wanted to watch Mary Poppins.
Well, I think that's natural, isn't it?
Which is not. It's not even a film that I'm into. It made me more nostalgic for a film that I get quite bored by.
So, I got fond memories of that film, dancing to with my gran when I was rated to about 2 or 3 on the sofa, pretending we were dancing on top of the chimney top. So that's my memory of Mary Poppins.
Yeah,
it's quite sad, really.
Yeah, it really is.
But But yeah, rated his specs for that one. Happy memories of that film.
So, yeah.
And yeah, fun time.
Yeah, so the next Venom film is going to be subtitled "Let There Be Carnage," and I don't know what to expect. I've seen some set photographs. Woody Harrelson doesn't quite have the mental hair he's got in the post title thing from this.
Is it not as like slapped on wig?
No, it did look like a bit like a wig on.
Difference.
It looked like he stepped right off, his role from Hunger Games. I thought, hold on a minute, he's into the Capitol and had a hairdo.
Well, it made the Hunger Games look restrained.
Well, it did, yeah. Crazy hairdo.
The problem with I found with putting this I said Woody Allen again, Woody Harrelson in.
Don't do it. Don't do it.
But let's just call him Woody and be done with it.
Woody H.
Putting Woody Harrelson in like as Carnage just seems like it's great as a cameo in an end credit scene that you never get to, but
Yes.
but doing something remotely serious afterwards. Would you seriously cast Woody Harrelson? And he said, "Again, would you really?" Woody Harrelson.
This is going to be a repeating problem, isn't it? I can just feel it when we say Woody Allen
We'll
in
just
about
have to
an
blank
hour's
his
time.
name out.
Yeah.
No, I'm not super.
Yeah, Woody
knowledgeable.
Harrelson was great in
I know
Sleepers.
Venom far better than I know Carnage. But I am aware of Cletus Cassidy. I've got a mental image in my head of what he looks like, and it's not Woody Harrelson. He's the wrong age. He's the wrong energy. Yeah.
But it's too cartoonish, you know what I mean? It's like it's something you see in an SNL sketch.
Yeah, I'd go along with that. But let's wait and see. I mean, yeah, that's kind of boxed them into that's now the casting.
Yeah.
And just because you liked working with him on Zombieland or whatever. But anyway, Ruben Fleischer's a strange fish as a director because Gangster Squad was such a bland film.
Great cast. Potential
really good cast. Yeah.
Potential to be actually really rather good fun, like proper like Untouchable type, action
and
flick.
we really are missing sort of films that have that sort of noirish 40s, 50s LA look to it. Sort of. It may have been Chicago. I can't remember now. Long time ago, but yeah. But there you go. And it came out like
it was
18
in LA,
months after,
but you know what I mean. Like that
came out about 18 months after the video game LA Noire, and I know after that there were attempts to create those types of TV series. I know Frank Darabont was involved in one of them, and obviously that all died away. But there was a period where that sort of golden age of Hollywood era sort of TV series, with gumshoe type detectives in it and all the rest of it were sort of de rigueur, and it died away. Gangster Squad could have really served that, but the film wasn't very good. It wasn't terrible either. It's just like, as evidenced by I can't remember where it was set and stuff, it's kind of forgettable. It's just I vaguely remember some of the cast, and it's like, Christ, that's a strong cast you've wasted there. But there you go. As for this film, if I just sort of lead off with some opening thoughts, really, I'm surprised at how well it did, just because. I know Tom Hardy's a name, but not every film he does is a massive smash by any stretch of the imagination, and not every comic book film does do 850 plus million, on its first outing. Sometimes, the sequel will pick up and do that sort of money. And it's not a wildly expensive film, as judged by some of the effects, which we'll come to. When the Venom symbiote is sort of fully encompassing, it kind of looks all right, but it looks really kind of... I haven't seen effects like that since the War of the Worlds adaptation, which was like 13 years before, where it's got that kind of unfinished sheen on it. It looks a little cheap. And apart from that, I just found it... accent aside, because I'm not sure how good his accent is. Again, sometimes I'll hear an American accent and be able to judge it fairly accurately. I'm not sure with his, but something doesn't quite ring correct with it. But apart from that, Tom Hardy's really good in it. It's really charismatic as a lead. It works pretty well. But the story's kind of a little bit paint by numbers. It's quite cliched in the sort of evil scientist come entrepreneur and, who's a bit mad and sort of kills.
It's a
Let's.
well-worn trope that we've seen before.
Well,
really,
they're forcing it to human trials. How many films have we seen that in? We're not ready. Do it. That
Do it
kind.
now. It's for the good of mankind.
We've seen it time and time again. We're going to go to human trials before we're ready. I think they could have done a little bit more setting up the symbiotes, but as you look at the sort of pacing of the film and do occasional time checks, in the overall scheme of how long the film is, and it is 112 minutes, Chris is right, it is 20 minutes of credits, not 10.
But that is mostly because of the extra bit tacked on.
Yeah, because of the mid-scene.
Maybe
the
my
mid-credit
version
scene.
didn't have that, because I think mine was 102 minutes, but it doesn't matter either way. We'll come to all that later. But the point is, in the overall scheme of the running time, pretty much everything happens where you'd expect it to happen. But the other thing is, pretty much what you would expect to happen is what's happening as well. So, on the plus side, we saw the sort of full Venom character earlier than I was expecting. I just had this horrible image. It would be like Spider-Man 3, and with this sort of budget, we wouldn't see the full Venom until the last couple of scenes of the film. And I heard rumours of that. So fair play that we had full scenes of him. And unlike Spider-Man, some of the Spider-Man films where they take the mask off purely because they seem insecure about not showing the leading man's face, I think they did the right amount of it's Tom, it's the symbiote. The characters were distinct from each other. They're both voiced by Tom Hardy, but obviously the Venom voice is heavily treated. I did look that up because they're very different. And the Venom voice doesn't sound like Tom Hardy in any version of his voice we've heard, but obviously...
No, I was really surprised to learn.
Little things like setting it in San Francisco. I know the Ant-Man films are set there, but we've seen an awful lot of New York. So,
yeah, it's a nice change to be in a different location,
that.
isn't it?
I don't know. Given that Venom is synonymous with Spider-Man, I would assume Eddie Brock and all that is normally East Coast, so I liked that. It gave it a distinct look. Funnily enough, in the last episode, I promised Becca I'd watch Mrs. Doubtfire, and because I promised it on air, I watched it like the day before I watched this. And it was like they must have like lived in like the same street.
I think they did. They did look quite similar.
Yeah, and those window
Be expecting
bays,
Pierce Brosnan to come around and knock on Tom Hardy.
those window bays are quite distinctive, aren't they?
They are. They're quite iconic. There's a tour. Obviously, I've not been for probably over a decade now. But like, there's a tour, a walking tour that you can take, and those particular set of houses, they're quite historic as well, especially in regards to kind of like all the sort of fires and natural disasters that have happened around the area. But they're quite famous.
They look almost like Civil War era or something.
I don't know they're very much kind of that sort of time.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're quite quite.
I can imagine them surrounded by countryside and little house on the prairie or something.
On a giant hill.
But as for Mrs. Doubtfire, just as an aside, I did enjoy it very much. But yeah, so the look of it was good. Yeah, well, I thought it would great, and it didn't. I enjoyed it, but
no, I'm glad you watched it.
So
it's good fun.
Look and feel I kind of like. Score I can barely remember. Effects look a bit unfinished. Good leading man performance. By numbers plot. There's a better film to be made in this universe. Tom Hardy, when I read into it, I thought he was a bit of a hired gun, but it turns out he's a bit of a Venom freak in real life.
He's amazing.
Big
I've got
fan
a fun
of
fact about that at the end of the show.
Okay. And so I don't think it suffered from being divorced from the Spider-Man universe as much as it could have. I think had they set it in New York, I think it would have been the elephant in the room. So moving it was fine, and it's just fine. I think we will talk about Chris's pun in a minute, because when we've done opening thoughts, it's worth mentioning that this is not the best film with a Tom Hardy lookalike with this presence made this year, which is a bit disappointing. Lee Whannell, he of The Invisible Man, made a better film called Upgrade on a much, much smaller budget with Logan Marshall Green, who's a bit of a sort of...
bit of a Hardy-alike.
A bit of a Hardy-alike to look at. He was the first Shocker in Spider-Man Homecoming, so there's a bit of a link there. Very different films, but the premises are very, very similar in terms of what they're actually doing.
I think it's like the kind of like talking to like another intelligent being like that can take control of your body. So it's like, oh, I'll you take over.
And,
goes, okay.
Give you a skill set whilst taking from you at the same time and adding a bit of darkness to your character. Very different film, because that's much more in the horror genre. When I picture that film, it did have multiple locations, but I only picture his apartment when I think of that film. And I think it's because it was disproportionately set there, because it's not an expensive film. They don't have a lot of money for locations and effects and God knows what else. It's very much a horror film. It's got like a bit of a twist in it, which there isn't in this. But the premise is, just if you just sort of name the 3 or 4 most important things about the story, you could name the 3 or 4 same things. But that's a film called Upgrade, which is just dropped on British Netflix, and I would assume worldwide. And it's worth a look if you've not seen it. But just to summarise my first thoughts on this film, though, it's kind of mediocre. I had a better time with it than I was expecting, because, like I say, take away the Spider-Man element, I thought this would be a lazy, cheap cash-in. The cheap element is slightly there in the effects work. Some of the action is really badly shot, and we'll get to it. I don't think they delineate between the different symbiotes enough. I think the plot is paint by numbers, but there's just a good enough leading man with a just interesting enough relationship to his ex and his ex's new partner and things like that. And a distinctive look, because they've set it in San Francisco but shot it very differently from the Ant-Man films. It's not as busy a film as Ant-Man, in terms of Ant-Man is always like having action sequence on busy streets. This feels a very deserted San Francisco.
Yeah, I sort of wondered the same as well. It's one of those films where I kind of thought, oh, even though it's, sorry to interrupt you there, but it's just kind of like where I'm a big one for kind of like looking at the setting and seeing if it feels like a character in the movie. I didn't feel that as much.
It feels like a setting, not a character.
Yeah, it's still a
distinctive
beautiful
setting.
city, and you still kind of get a sense of the city and a sense of the surroundings, and you see some of the iconic landmarks. But yeah, obviously a lot of it happens at night as well. But yeah, I didn't get that sense from this film.
No, and it's amazing how varied you can shoot San Francisco for a city that's not as big as you would think. And
No.
a lot of the houses look the same, and they do. But compare this to any of the Planet of the Apes films. The newer ones. Compare it to Ant-Man, they all look very different. It's kind of mediocre. I don't dislike it. I don't know how I'd review it. It's somewhere between a 2 and a 3-star film, and I think it depends how well disposed I felt on the day I sat down to write it. If I was doing that, I wouldn't argue with people that had really enjoyed it, but it's certainly nothing special. But at least it's pretty well paced. And Tom Hardy is more invested in this than I thought he would be. Didn't realise what a big fan he was, and I just thought this might be a bit of a phone-it-in performance. But everyone seems kind of committed. The final thing I think I'll say is one thing I'd almost forgotten, and it's just occurred to me, is before it was released, Tom Hardy said something like the best 45 minutes of the film were on the cutting room floor. So I was worried it had been hacked to pieces. Now, on running time, it looks like it might have been. And who knows if there was a really good film in here. Maybe we'll find that out from like the sequel, that they'll be emboldened by the box office to put a little bit more of whatever the vision is on screen. But it's perfectly serviceable. It's become fashionable to knock this film, but it's all right.
Becca, what are your thoughts?
That's a review. It's all right. It's all right. Yeah, I don't really have a lot to say. I meant to go and see this film at the cinema. Obviously, a big fan of Tom Hardy. I also meant to go and see this film when it came out. Just really passed me by for some reason. I didn't get around to it. Obviously, watched it today for this review, and it's okay. For the visuals, I kind of thought I was mildly impressed by. I think there's probably one moment where I kind of thought, oh, that's a little bit ropey. I think it's probably the scene. Where he's kind of like eating lobsters out of the tank and that sort of thing. That looks a bit weird. And there's, I think, during the fight scene in the apartment as well, where he's fighting off all the government guys, or the scientist claiming about their property. It does kind of look a little bit sketchy. I think this is going to sound really. I don't know quite what the word is. No, I'm just going to say, yeah, Tom Hardy's like the main reason, to watch this film, really. As Dave said, he is, he's 100% invested in the role. And even if, like me, like you're, new to the character, not familiar with it, and only coming to it through a Spider-Man lens, definitely is your reason to watch this. And not just because I'm a fan, but objectively, he's one of these actors who really, he can't really make that bad of a film. whatever he does, he kind of puts, his heart and soul into it. And even with this film, for example, where we're coming to it as an actor and a fan of comic books, he perhaps might not have been so familiar with this role, but he sought, outside help and help from his family, to try and get under the skin, as it were, of this character, quite literally. So I think, the main reason there is probably Tom Hardy's performance. Gives it, stellar performance, and you basically, you're getting your money's worth and then some. But otherwise it's a brisk pace. I was really surprised at it only being like 90 minutes, an hour and a half. I was like, wow, it's been a long time since I've seen, saw a film that wasn't an animated or children's cartoon, very short film.
Or maybe a horror or a comedy.
Oh yeah, maybe definitely something like that, for example. But it just really surprised
there aren't
me.
many though. You're right. Certainly not. I know this in superhero film terms. This is quite low budget.
Certainly within the Marvel universe as well.
In absolute terms, it's quite a high budget film, and high budget films don't come in at this sort of length generally anymore, do they?
No, that did surprise me a little bit. I think, where's the rest of it? Or if there's going to be a particularly meaty mid or end credits punch. But then obviously this is Sony. Even though it's kind of within the Marvel banner, as it were. Strong performances all round. Obviously, you've got two British actors, kind of a strong leads there. Obviously, villain's character and anti-hero. It's quite interesting. See Tom Hardy kind of play that kind of role. Got a really, really diverse cast. I think that's fantastic. Cinematography, this one looks brilliant for what it's worth. If it's slightly thin plot-wise, and San Francisco might be undeserved, and maybe the effects might look a little bit ropey, but still the overall look and how this film was shot and photographed, it looks beautiful. The nighttime scenes could be paintings. I just think it looks really lovely. Short run time's got a quite brisk pace. I would say probably Michelle Williams, is that her name?
Yes.
Yep. I forgot her name there for a minute.
Again, it's all connected. She had a child with Heath Ledger, didn't she?
Yes, she did indeed. Yeah, that was going to be one of my fun facts. But
I'm sorry.
No. I thought that's a bit too. Everybody knows that, so it's not really a fun fact. It's kind of like in the public domain. I kind of feel that she's a bit underserved by all. Really, don't really see very much of her. And to have an actress really of her stature, I kind of felt a little bit like last time you kind of got all these really big name people in, only for them to be, whisked off screen for 3 minutes, and it's just like, why have somebody of her standing, and if you're not really going to use it,
She's never been a superstar, but she's always been a name. And actually, when you go back through her filmography, she's just always great, and she picks good stuff.
She does, exactly.
And not everything's going to be fantastic in end result, but they're always interesting.
She's got some really solid films there to her name.
The last thing I saw her in was The Greatest Showman, actually, but even that was like a bit of song and dance.
Yeah, no, she's fabulous in that, definitely. Even though it's quite very kind of film as well.
It divided opinion, shall we
Bit of a
say.
Marmite movie. So
I liked it, but I can see why people didn't. And I'm not into musicals. It's rare I warm to one, but I kind of liked that. But
well, there we are. How about that?
But yeah, right back to Brokeback Mountain. She was a little bit overshadowed by the other female lead, who's also connected to that. Anne Hathaway.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, she's a little bit
Anne
overshadowed.
Hathaway was the bigger name and the slightly bigger part of the two of them.
Definitely.
But yeah,
I just kind of feel here that she was a bit underserved, but
yeah.
But yeah, that's just my take anyway.
Yeah, no, I'd go along with that. I mean, they tried to give us something to do, and it's nice to see them sort of trying to have sort of grown-up relationships in breakups and things like that. At least that's like a new wrinkle, I suppose.
Yeah.
It adds a kind of new nuance. I mean, she still give, she still gave a solid performance, but I'd just like to have seen more of her, just because I quite rate her as an actress. That's it, really.
Yeah, I mean, she is in it quite a fair bit, though. I think the problem is she hasn't got much to do.
No,
there isn't she does.
Considering she's an Oscar nominee, she does, aside as well as all the others.
She does help Eddie and give him back the suit, and then Raxley turns up to press a button on the control panel, and that's about it. But things she does add to it. She does add as they said, like a proper grown up relationship. She's likable enough for you to want to see her get back with Eddie Brock, even though she's actually in a, by any standards, like an actually decent relationship with another, which is another thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which is another thing, isn't it? It's like, the kind of reverse of the douchebag boyfriend is kind of like they're kind of reversing that these days now, aren't they?
Yeah.
It's like the other guy is actually pretty alright, and I'm kind of liking that as well.
Not to the point you want to slap him though. Do you know what I
No.
mean?
Yeah.
He's actually really decent. He's trying to help. He's not letting jealousy get in the way. He understands his ex is still going to care. His girlfriend's still going to care.
He's a bit of an ass. But not much of an ass.
But it's like his moment he sort of like he meets, goes, oh wow, I loved your stuff, and like and she's looking at him going like, what?
Really? What?
I very much think that they did some decent work there, and they walked that tightrope of, I mean, Venom's an anti-hero anyway, and a villain depending on the film. Little bit like we're getting with the DC universe now, that if Harley Quinn turned up in a Batman film, she'd be the villainess. If she turns up in Birds of Prey, she's kind of the anti-hero lead. And I think the same is true of Venom. Venom in this universe is kind of the protagonist. So, but we've got to identify with Eddie Brock, and yet she's absolutely justified to dump him. Absolutely justified. Without him having alienated the audience, he's done the wrong thing and deserves to lose her. So it does some things very well. Sorry, Chris, I'm interrupting your.
No. Go for it. No, but yeah, it does all that. What else can I say about but with Eddie, I think the thing that Tom Hardy does really well is balance. It's actually sort of the comedy aspect. It's not necessarily like doing the action stuff with the suit, or the sort of symbiote, I should say. It is like the comedic aspects of, like, you know, when he's talked to, he jumps back in his bath and he's like, you know, it lets out that a weird noise, and it's just like it makes you giggle. It's like, you know, it's kind of makes it kind of fun to watch his whole reactions to everything. I think he's actually, in terms of balancing the comedy but not making it too overtly comedic. It
doesn't unbalance the tone of the film. No. And we've said that about so many films where, you know, one minute it's action, the next minute it's serious and gravitas in relationships, but the next minute it's slapstick, and this doesn't unbalance the film. The only thing I think I'd like to add to that is Tom Hardy is always in pretty good shape. He doesn't look like a wimp, and yet when the guy next door is playing his music too loud pre-symbiote, and he's like clenching his fists and getting really angry, he actually sells us that, like, he's not got the balls to go and do anything about it.
Yeah, I mean, there's also like well, as we understand as audience, there's also the consequence that might happen. It's like, yeah, well, you know, you still got to live next door to him, and that might not solve the issue. Do you know what I mean? It's there's always that element, and plus also I don't think he's like quite the next door neighbour's like a small guy either, is it? No. But I think you know, he does a really good job of, you know, you believe him that he's a flawed character. But you get why he does what he does. He's just like, well, I'm an investigator. I want to push people's buttons, and it's that kind of not knowing when to stop, and not when to sort of use your head a bit more. I think I may be saying a bit too much here, for his own good. Really, I think that he balances that well, and nothing really jars. Nothing goes like, nothing's a bit too. Come on, mate, you would never do that. In a million years, and he doesn't play like a overtly tough guy, as you say, but he is confident in terms of being like a journalist. You know, like when he finds out he's being followed, you know, he's quite convincing in that regard.
Yeah, well, that's me convinced. You're making me like this film more than I did.
Well, you know, it's...
Well, with that, we're thinking, yes, this film is excellent.
Well, yeah...
Well, instead of thinking it's really by rote, you're saying a number of things that making me think, yeah, they've really thought that bit through, and there's a bit more nuance in that than I thought. I mean,
nothing you said is wrong, Dave, because there isn't really much there in terms of me. But then, in a way, it is a bit it's almost like, well, we're used to, like, Marvel, and it's like 2 hour plus running time, and there's all these kind of things they've built, and there's all, you know, they're all adds on this character, and they've all done things really well, when in reality this is like a really lean 90-minute film. It got a good lead, relatively good cast, and there's not much to it. Like, you know, Upgrade is probably, you know, a bit more, you know, original and got a bit more guts about it, so to speak, but it's fine. You know, it does its job. It's a fun watch, and I know let's see what the sequel brings out. What we'll say is that the last, the end fight again is a bit cliched, what have you, but what can you do about that? I think some of the special effects are a bit ropey.
They're very ropey, and also you've got very, very dark creatures fighting against a dark background.
I mean, I'm not too sure about the villain. I'm not sure whether I like him as a villain or not. I mean,
Riz Ahmed?
Yeah, I mean, he's a great actor, and if
he's been given a very sort of thin, cliched thing to play. I think that's my problem. It isn't just that it's thin, because I understand what you're saying about there's nothing wrong with sticking something straight up that 90 minutes and there you go. But it is all very... We've seen every single element of this film in terms of basic plotting. Obviously, we haven't seen the Venom symbiote as a lead in his own film and stuff, but just basically, the evil scientist who has this grand but slightly warped idea of something that can change humanity, forces it to human trials too early. Anybody who whistle blows in the organization is, killed or disappears or whatever. We've got we even had it in the Amazing Spider-Man, go down to the Veterans Center. Well, in this film they're tested on homeless people. There's nothing we've not seen here before.
No,
and Riz Ahmed would have done extremely well to do anything with this, to be honest.
I think he does. I mean, there are parts of it that I do like. Like he is relatively quite cold, and
yes,
and he does that by trying to balance out like the kind of the public image of like, oh, I'm a really positive guy, and I give tours to kids, and I'm like. He's actually pretty charismatic with the kids. Yeah, but he's really good with mixing that with the typical corporate bullshit as well. Do you know what I mean? And then, but he is like he does well being an arsehole. But the problem is, there isn't a lot to do. As you say, you've seen it all done before, and I'm not too sure. Like, as a villain, I don't know. It's when he gets when Riot, he gels with Riot, I don't know, it just feels like a bit of a cop-out, really, because, it should be him is a villain, and, Riot should sort of take over some... Do you know what I mean? I'm not too sure if that quite works as well, or if you're not given enough...
It is, let's just wrap this thing up. All right, well, how do we have the final confrontation when, Eddie's like an enhanced being? Well, just put him in the other symbiote that's been tracking all the way through the film. It's okay. The third act of this film is the weakest anyway, which isn't unusual for action films. But
no, because it is just like, well, let's wrap this up and let's have everyone fight, which is usually fine because that's when you usually have your big set piece.
Yeah, anyway. But the set piece, they don't really have the money to do it justice. And again, black against black. And two symbiotes that look really similar. So,
and they literally are melding together.
And they're literally melding together at one point. It's like, this is not visually thrilling. And there are slight compositing problems where, the humans are sort of momentarily released and they don't look like they're in the same frame. And it's just a money and time issue. It's the weakest part of the film. But then I never got that into this villain anyway. It's not a comment on Riz Ahmed's abilities. I think it's just a comment. The most interesting relationships in this are sort of Eddie with his ex and Eddie with the symbiote. And the fact that I find the relationship between Eddie and the symbiote interesting is sort of in the plus column.
It is funny because even like at the end, where he makes believe that he doesn't have the symbiote anymore, it kind of sacrificed itself, and he's talking to Michelle Williams, and you hear the reveal of hearing Venom in his head. It makes you laugh.
Yeah.
It's like it does really work. I mean, I forgot what the line of dialogue is, but it's like it's almost like, we'll get her back.
Yeah.
And later on, it's like, oh, what are we having tonight? Tater tots and chocolate.
Yeah. And he's like, fair enough.
Yep.
That was the one thing that I thought was a plot hole the first time I saw it. We'll go to it as we go through the film, because I never thought they fundamentally addressed the fact that his internal organs were being like eaten by this damn thing, and then all of a sudden that went away as a problem, but it is actually addressed. And we'll come to it.
Yeah, because obviously the reason why he's not that is because he's basically a match, isn't it? And that's why it seems to sort of come out of him. Well, we'll say now. What it is that the symbiote was feeding on his organs. Right, we know the symbiote can heal him, right? So any damage he does to the organs, the symbiote can undo. But he says there's a line of dialogue to Eddie towards the end of the film that just says, basically, if you don't feed me, your liver's looking nice. It's something like that. That basically, as long as Eddie keeps him fed with the stuff he wants to eat, Eddie is safe. There was just a period of time where he just wasn't feeding him enough, and he was starting to cannibalize Eddie's organs. Yeah.
But it is established in the film that he can fix that as well. So that's at least one sort of issue dealt with. But there you go. Okay, shall we discuss this film sequentially, folks?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Why not?
Given we're about 50 minutes in. They do kind of get on with it. Don't we go straight to, like, the space rocket?
Pretty much. It's like sort of opens in space.
Film, even though it does have a very short run time, it doesn't hang around. It whips along at quite a brisk pace.
I know. It crashes in... It specifies a part of Malaysia, like East Malaysia or something, but it's definitely
quite
Malaysia.
specific.
Yeah, I don't know why it's specific, because most... no
does
offence
that
to
appear in the
Malaysia,
comic,
but
perhaps?
most
I don't know.
Western audiences don't know that much about that part of the world.
No.
So anyway, it kind of crashes. I don't think we quite know why it does at this point.
No.
I always thought there was going to be a reveal that they got loose in space and overwhelmed the craft or something. Could have been that. We could get a retcon next time.
Yeah, because do you remember those rumours about there was a film called Life, which had like an alien kind of orgasm thing. Orgasm, Jesus Christ. Organism.
Right. I thought that was like a deliberate mistake, but it wasn't, was it?
No.
The trailer.
Life with
Jesus Christ. Like, mixing up, Woody Allen and orgasm. Yeah, great.
Oh my god, fine form. Oh my gosh.
Anyway.
Sorry.
That's a bit embarrassing.
An Adrian orgasm. Orgasm.
Yeah, so there were rumours that it was going to be a secret prequel, like it'll set up Venom. Okay. But it wasn't, because it's kind of odd, because like the organisation is Life. It's called the Life Company, isn't it, or something like that, which would kind of make sense in.
Jameson is the only. I missed the reference in the film, but I didn't miss it. I just didn't absorb it. In that, like, just
Life Foundation. There you are. Yeah.
Well, no, just after the film finished, I was like, "Oh, that was They did say Jameson's the only survivor, so it's J. Jonah Jameson's son, but they don't flag it up here."
No, it's not really kind of spoken of, really, is it?
The implication is
fleeting reference at the end.
The implication is it's in the same universe as Spider-Man, but it can't, because of the quality control of Marvel, they can't consent to it being in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, so they keep the links kind of opaque. But Jameson says something latched onto him, and they basically, the ambulance crashes. And it's because the symbiote is basically attacked.
Yeah.
And it basically attaches to one of the female medical team.
And it starts like walking along the road, and then we introduce to Eddie Brock.
Yeah. Last thing to say on her is she was obviously hurt in the crash, but it shows you her leg healing.
Yeah.
So this symbiote, and it will become important, this symbiote has got healing properties.
Yeah, healing powers, healing
I've already
properties.
dealt with that in the preamble, but we do see it here. Yeah, Eddie Brock, he lives in quite a nice place with his partner who's a lawyer, Anne.
And the cat.
And a cat. And he works as like a sort of on the street reporter, presenting the Eddie Brock report.
Hard-hitting news, taking down local scumbags and figures in power.
Yeah, and he's basically, we get a bit of establishment on that as he goes around interviewing people and expose type news.
Because he looks like he's got his own website and he's pretty independent, isn't he?
But he's not.
Yeah.
It rides both ponies on that. He looks like a bit of a YouTube sensation, but it turns out he does work for a network, because he goes to see his boss on a high floor of some building in San Francisco with a lovely view, and he's told he's got to go to interview Colton Drake, who is the head of this Life Foundation. But he says, you're just there to sort of we've got to play the corporate game, because he could buy us and and do anything.
Go and chat him up, basically.
Go, shake his hand, ask about his work. That's it. Eddie immediately says, but he's dodgy. And I don't think the film has really established why Eddie thinks that.
No, it's just...
Not at this stage.
No.
No.
I think, yeah...
I've got a bad feeling about this.
Yeah, I think it's just established that he's very much likes to sort of like... he's very much in the sort of like investigating big corporate money and government.
Yeah, there is a clip where he's talking about, I think, the dead being in landfill and how companies don't care about their people and stuff, or the poor or whatever. I think it might be that they've built on an area that was the homeless were living or something like that. It's quite well established what he is there for the little guy sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like being the anti-hero. He's kind of got that. He looks out for the homeless people, for the underdogs, for example.
It is established he was in New York before, and he got sort of drummed out. Something to do with him being hot-headed. So it does hint at that old Eddie Brock temper, which we get when he was part of Spike.
Yeah, just pushing buttons he shouldn't be pushing, kind of thing.
Yeah,
like
pissing off the wrong people. That's what his boss is trying to say to him.
Yeah,
Yeah, basically, don't piss everybody off.
Well, we can see from the footage we've seen of his reporting that he's actually given quite a long leash to do what he wants. It's just this one time that it's saying, well, you don't piss off this guy. But so he's at home. His relationship looks pretty decent.
Yeah. She works for him as well. She works for Drake. She's
his lawyer, isn't she?
Yeah, she's on like the team. She's like she. Yeah,
I don't think she works for him, as in she works for the Life. Or maybe she does.
I think she works for the company, but she doesn't work.
Her legal firm represents the Life Foundation.
Oh, okay, that's what it is. Yeah,
yeah,
that's what it is. Because much like Eddie's about to be fired for what happens next, she's fired for like the flip side of that.
Yeah.
Because she goes off out of the room and her laptop's on, and he logs into it. Obviously knows her password. And starts reading her emails, which are about the deaths from the shuttlecraft, because 3 of them died.
Dumpable offence, that.
Sorry?
It's a dumpable offence, that, isn't it?
I think that is,
reading your partner's private stuff.
Yeah, well, not only that, there's the sort of...
GDPR, all kinds of problems.
GDPR is a European Union rule.
I know, but still, from an EU point of view.
There's lawyer-client privilege, though.
Doesn't even apply, but never mind.
Yeah, but there's lawyer-client privilege.
Exactly, this is it.
That'll
Confidentiality.
That'll be a work email. And it is a sackable offence because he's logged into what presumably is either a work laptop or at least her work email. And
it's sackable and dumpable.
Yeah. So, but he goes to see Drake the next day, which is meant to be this like meet and greet. He's meant to be walking around with a camera on and going, "What fascinating work you're doing here." We see Drake talking to the kids about. What is he talking to the kids about?
They're just on a tour, and he sort of gives them an introductory, and
He said something like something would be cool, wouldn't it? And I can't remember what that was. Doesn't really matter, I suppose.
Obviously he's trying to like find life on other planets as well. So I think it's like obviously something to do with space.
Yeah. And starts asking him about the deaths. And Drake immediately like cuts the interview short, and next thing we see, Eddie's being fired. This film's really efficient. Straight back to his office, he's fired.
Yeah, we didn't waste any time.
He goes to meet her from work. She's walking out with the contents of her desk, and she breaks up with him literally there and then on the street. So I don't know where we are in the running time at this point, but that's pretty efficient.
Yeah. So she, pretty much breaks up. So they established that they're engaged, so she gives him back the ring. And we cut to the paramedic or the medic arriving at a market, and then there's a bit of altercation
bites the head
there.
off the needle.
Wasn't that in the trailers?
When her arm turns into like a
it's like when she sort of spears
Terminator
everybody.
2 style, yeah.
Yeah, I did think, hold on a minute, I've seen this film before.
And she goes over to like a quite frightened, infirm older lady in the market. Touches her, not sexually, but touches her and heals that lady and clearly passes the symbiont over to her.
Passes it on.
And the implication, we don't follow every move of this symbiote, but it's quite clearly making its way around the world through different bodies.
Yeah. And
I think the reason she transferred to that old woman is she's now been spotted killing people in that form. So, yeah. Then I think we cut to 6 months later. Eddie's living in I was about to say a shithole apartment, but in San Francisco it'd probably still be quite expensive.
It'd still be quite nice, and still quite a bit of money.
That's the thing. Like, there is a bit of one of the things I did sort of think about when the film is like he comments how he's like lost everything. Like, he mentions I lost my apartment, and it's like your apartment looks actually pretty sweet, actually.
Yeah,
it's all right. It's just
quite nice. It's quite big.
Basic. I do remember. I think it was Now Playing podcast reviewed this film, and the only thing I can remember from their review is where one of the presenters who knows the West Coast said that apartment would be $5,000 a month.
Yeah, didn't he sort of live near the area or something?
I was just like,
he just sort of said could say how much it would cost you.
One of those. Inland you can get some incredible houses so much cheaper than in this country, but like on the coasts, I get the impression that property can be extremely.
Yeah, even the Bay Area. Oh my gosh. Beautiful, but very expensive.
I've got some irrational issues with this film in that just some cliches it falls into, like. I have a real problem when people are job hunting and they circle something in the paper. I don't know why. I don't like that. Firstly, would you job hunt that way in this day and age? But secondly, if you see a fairly sizable advert in the middle of the page, do you really
need a big red pen to
draw around it in pen?
He also does that annoying thing where like he'll get a drink out of the fridge and then like not drink it or leave it on the side or take a swig and then leave out on the side of that. That's quite annoying as well.
You get the impression he might be blacklisted because he's ringing up, saying I can pretend to be somebody else and stuff like that. And then he's circling dishwasher, and I'm thinking, that's the one you want to circle, dishwasher. I know you're a bit desperate, but you've circled like that. Oh, gotta remember that one.
Yeah, it's just that's how desperate he is.
Yeah, he's obviously fallen off quite a high perch.
It gets the point across. I just think it's done a bit lazily.
It's a bit. It does kind of hammer the point home, really, doesn't it? It's a bit kind of hit you on the head with it.
He's introduced as drunk as well. He's a bit looks even like more scruffier and a bit worse for wear.
I was about to say that's the cliche of men falling apart without a woman, but actually it's not really a cliche. It's true. But yeah, oh well.
He witnesses the crime at work. It's not real. Well, it's crime.
He's a friendly sort. He goes to like night stores because that's another thing. Everyone shops at like a local convenience place. And does their shopping at night. He's talking to a homeless lady who's outside, and she's taken all the papers, and he gives her like $20. So he's a good egg, really, and he hasn't really got that money. So yeah, decent, basically. But a little bit of cowardice there because stuff's going on in the store and he won't have any part of it.
Please, aren't Dave? Okay.
I know that's the thing. It doesn't work in American films, but they still try to play that.
Yeah.
That he walks over with a drink and a sandwich and stuff, and he's like, he's one step away from lovely weather we've been happening.
I was going to say that would be the next line if it was a British film. That was what he would say.
She's just been like, it's clearly something more because he keeps going in and like shaking her down for more money.
It's like, you like protection and things like that.
Yeah, although he looks like an armed robber as opposed to a mobster, but whatever. Then what?
Well, yeah, it's just sort of establishing where we've been. It's like 6 months afterwards. The Life Foundation, what Drake is, he's found like a match with the River Rodent. It's kind of similar to a couple of weeks ago, really, isn't it? And he's like, right, we must switch to human trials.
It's a rabbit in this case.
Yes.
Yeah.
But
yeah, similar to the mice or whatever it was, or gerbils in the Amazing Spider-Man. Yeah.
And the scientist played by Jenny Slate is like showing a bit concerned because he's very much he basically sort of like aggressively kind of like sort of threatens her, really, doesn't he? He kind of like sort of threatens her job.
Yes.
In a passive kind of way. It's sort of
it's immediately we've got to go to human trials.
Yeah.
Such a cliche of these films.
That is another cliche, I must say.
How does it work with some and not others? They make it analogous to organ donation. So you've just got to be something of a match. And they start experimenting, we find out, on homeless people, because in time we're going to find out that homeless lady's gone missing from her street corner. There is already a guy there, isn't there, about to be tested on.
It kind of he kind of gives like I think that happens a bit later on, I imagine, but he kind of gives like a sort of like a speech about how, like, it's meant to be motivational, and he kind of talks about, like, in the like a Bible about Isaac and things like that, and how God doesn't really exist, but kind of like talks like it, like it's almost like if he's basically like replacing God. Like, I won't let you down, and then just sort of lets the symbiote take over, and it kills him. He goes like, okay, next.
Bring in the next volunteer, he says.
Yeah.
Because he's just that evil. Although Jenny Slate looks suitably horrified, she does actually do the reaction work here.
She does a good job, considering this is like her first Columbia movie. She does a really good job. So I've got a fun fact about her later on in the show.
Cool. Eddie goes to see Anne, only to find she's on a date. And she's like, "Why are you here?" And it's like, "I miss you." And that's about it for that scene. Yeah. It's just they're still thinking of each other. Well, he's still thinking of her, and she's moved on.
The scientist also. This is where we also see the scientist approach Eddie, because he goes back, notices the homeless lady isn't there anymore. And that's where he's sort of like talking about like following and things like that.
He says, "In my job, you have to sort of sink into the background, follow people that don't want to be followed, and that sort of thing." And he said, "And you're terrible at it." And it turns out Jenny Slate's in there, basically, Dr. Dora. And she just hands him a card or something, but she just hints at things going on.
Yeah, and at first he's like, I don't want anything to do it, because,
it cost me my job and relationship and home.
Yeah.
Yeah. But he eventually does call her, and she sneaks him in sort of in the back of the car. And I think they kind of they're about to get caught by a guard, and she kind of runs distraction while he ends up in there, and he spots the homeless lady.
Yeah.
And she attacks him.
Yeah, he gets her out initially, tries to save her because she looks like.
Oh yeah, because she's been shot away. Yeah, she's been kidnapped, which is true. She has been kidnapped.
Yeah. And then she ends up like attacking, and the symbiote passes on to him, and then she's dead. She's dead, because that seems to happen when the symbiote just seems to sort of just kill whatever organism is in. and
Well, they're not feeding it at this point, are they? So it probably has eaten her organs, plus probably not a perfect match and things like that. I don't think it's necessary. Well, we see later in the film that when the symbiote leaves Eddie, Eddie isn't dead, but I don't think that's a plot hole. I don't think so. I think that does actually work. That it's established that it will eat you if you don't feed it properly, and of course she's basically locked up.
Yeah, I think it can survive longer if it's more of a match, so it's more compatible with.
There's an element of balance between the two creatures. It seems. Again, we're kind of inferring all this, but I think the film gives you enough to infer that. So Eddie now has the symbiote,
and he doesn't quite know that yet.
No, he doesn't. He doesn't know that yet. He's. I think the next thing is Drake finding the body and that there's a symbiote out of the facility.
There's a bit of a chase scene. He's like he's jumping over things and breaking through things like that he wouldn't normally do, but in the heat of the moment he's just trying to get away.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's not much to say, just a bit of a chase scene.
But he gets away.
Yeah.
And Eddie starts getting he's very sweaty, very pale, and extremely hungry, even for food that's rotted. He's picked chicken bones.
That was disgusting. It
was the chicken bones, because I've smelled off chicken before and I've tasted off chicken before. So I was just, you could almost taste it seeing it. Obviously, it's not off if you're going to make an actor eat it, but they've dressed it just well enough.
Yeah, they make it look great.
And he's just eating everything that goes, and he's got a bit of a fever. I can't remember when he first hears the voice.
He kind of look. Yeah, I think it's that kind of day. He starts washing his face and just he's burning up, and then he just hears "feed me" or something like that, and he's just what?
Yeah. And I think that might be when he goes to the restaurant. This film does whip along. He goes. Anne and her partner, I've forgotten his name. Yeah. They're in a restaurant, and he turns up there. It's the scene where he gets inside the lobster tank and just eats the head off it and stuff.
Oh my god!
It's there. He's sort of established that because he makes comments it's not fresh.
Yeah.
So he kind of wants more live food.
Yeah, and I think also he could be arrested here, but it's actually the boyfriend who rescues him and says, "Look, my patient," and takes him straight in for tests. And we first establish here that the MRI is too noisy for the symbiote.
Yeah.
Yes, it's over a certain number of decibels,
it's a certain frequency, I think.
Certain frequency, that was it.
Yeah.
Well, they're quite noisy though.
And then we have the funny scene with the neighbour.
He's annoying.
Where he does knock on the door and just the symbiote eyes come out of the face.
That was a bit creepy. I was ooh.
And then basically Drake's gang attack the home. And Eddie's about to give up. And the symbiote just attacks for him, fights them all off, and he's apologising while he's doing it.
He's I'm sorry.
He's got his arms up, and he's put your arms down, you're embarrassing me. Yeah. And that's all really well played. Yeah.
The only slight complaint is the effects are ropey as hell. But it's fine. And I think it leads straight onto a motorcycle chase, which they they used that extensively for the trailer, didn't they, Chris? If you remember, him with his arms pulling down, the symbiote's arms connecting with the bike and pulling him back towards. So this is one of the signature. This and the reveal of the full symbiote, which is in this scene as well, were centerpieces of the trailer.
Yeah, because this is
probably
quite
the best
quite extensive.
Yeah,
it's quite extensive action sequence. It starts with fighting this flat, and then he's getting away. Stops for a bit while he's him Venom have a bit of a talk, but then he's obviously you got the big motorbike chase and the drones and everything, which again I instantly thought of Fast and Furious 7 here, but like modern warfare on the streets of a major American city.
Yeah. and the arms sort of bonding to the bike and actually doing the work for him and things like that. It's because the only other action sequence in the film that would compete with this is a like blobby black mess. This is actually the best action sequence in the film. It's reasonably well done. It actually ends with sort of him fully transforming into Venom and biting off one of their heads.
Yeah.
That was kind of for me. That was kind of, some of the effects there were like a little bit stringy, I guess. But yeah, that was like I properly was. I was like, oh my god.
It's a bit, it's a bit sort of choppy with that because it kind of doesn't want to be as gruesome as that. But because can you remember like watching it, and each time it's like, did he just bite someone's head off? Because it's not remotely that clear because it's a bit too quick with it.
Yeah.
But I guess that's one of the things we have to kind of keep a rating down, haven't you? But
this film should have been R-rated, but it took 850 million, so I can't criticise that it isn't.
No, that's it. I mean, for a film that I think it's something that Tom Hardy spoke about, in interviews and everything. It was kind of he literally obviously did this film, something that his son was a big fan, and decided to make this one, make this film obviously so he could make a film that his son could watch. But literally that was a compromise. It was kind of PG-13 rating-ish a little bit, but also there's a scene where he bites somebody's head off. So,
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, that's it. Venom is now completely sort of revealed.
Yeah. And
I can't remember how long into the film we were. I really can't.
Well, we're kind of zipping along now. It's like,
minutes,
yeah, probably. Because he jumps into the river and swims across the other side and has a full-on chat with him.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, so that's where like sort of Venom actually sort of like pops out. His head pops out of him. Starts.
Yes, yeah. No, that's all right. Yes, because that's meant to look a bit stylized anyway, so I don't mind that looking less than perfect. Yeah. Okay. So then what?
Yes, he goes. So Dan sort of like looking at the report said like, oh, I need to see Eddie. I need to like examine him because he's concerned about
he's got a parasite.
Yeah.
How that would show on the test, I'm not sure, but yeah.
Yeah. So Eddie tries to break into the old in his old job basically. To leave
again,
the evidence.
Pally old Eddie, he's quite friendly with the security guard there, and he's worried, he's frightened of the symbiote at this point. So he's like, please don't argue, because it was earlier in the film he parked where he wanted and things like that. Yeah. Okay.
And
it ends up sort of on the roof, doesn't it?
Yeah. So he. So he ends up sort of managed to sort of get into like his old boss's like office, and leaves like his phone with like where he's taking like photos, and sort of like do the right thing or something along those lines.
Yeah.
And then he sort of goes to leave. Venom suggests going out the window, and then he goes to the lift and he hears like pussy.
Yeah.
That made me laugh.
Yeah.
I actually laughed out loud. I was like, what?
It's quite
Because
funny.
of Sean Connery in my ear.
We find out later, like Venom is kind of the nerd of his species.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a cool little wrinkle as well.
Yeah, he's kind of all quite tough, quite hard, and saying,
Any of
he's
that could
doing
have
things that he
ruined
wouldn't
character,
ordinarily
but
do,
I
and
thought
to
it
find
was all
out
right.
he's a bit annoyed.
Yeah. Okay, so we've determined it's a parasite. And then
This is like multiple points of the film. I'm always expecting a funnier line, but he's always like, I've got a parasite, and it's like, oh, okay.
It's draining on his heart's damaged, his heart's atrophied, they've said. I can't remember at what point. Yeah, they switch on. I don't know if it's the MRI that switches it on, but basically they separate Eddie from the symbiote and then shut it in the room. But it gets out through like a vent.
Yeah.
And sort of latches onto a dog. We do see the elderly woman is now sort of passes the riot symbiote over to like a little girl. Don't know how this girl travels.
That's scary. She's terrifying. Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
It's a bit the
her
shine.
and the little dog as well. I just think, oh my god.
Yeah.
Things that are meant to be small, cute, and fluffy are actually terrifying.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's just anyway. That's by the by.
I mean, yeah, she doesn't seem to be. There's things that little girl she doesn't seem to be traveling with anyone particularly. So
Yeah.
No,
No,
random,
that's
but
the
never
thing.
mind.
That's a bit awkward. But she does find Drake and basically pass the symbiote on to him.
yeah,
And then I think it's just so efficient. He goes straight to Eddie to sort of ask him where his symbiote is.
yeah,
Venom.
because they basically sort of we did miss out. He has a fight with the cops as well in the building.
Yes, he
that's
does.
a big secret. But he gets separated from the symbiote. Symbiote goes to the dog, and Drake's meant to basically sort of capture Eddie, and they take him to Drake, and he's basically trying to find out where the symbiote has gone.
Yeah. Because they think there's hundreds more of them in space, and they think that they can use humans as hosts because they need to be with an oxygen carrying being. And it will, eventually we can travel. It will allow us to travel through space as well. So because they can do without oxygen and things like that. So it's kind of a batshit idea, and it would mean sort of all humans being partnered with symbiotes. I think at that point, Anne gets Venom from the dog. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it's not shown, but you just sort of see Anne figures out that like the symbiote has gone into a dog, or Venom's gone into a dog.
Yeah, we don't actually see it transfer.
And
we
Drake,
see her as she Venom later.
Yeah, and
basically
Drake,
Venom with boobs.
Yes.
Yes.
And Drake basically sort of thinks, well, Eddie's no good to me, and decides to kill him off in the woods.
That's right, but before they can do that, like a mysterious figure appears, but obviously it's Anne inside the Venom outfit. Basically, a feminized Venom.
I read somewhere, wasn't she originally meant to be like a female character anyway, or wasn't it meant to be kind of like a female offshoot
of the
character?
Yeah, there is. This is comic book. Well, I would say comic book accurate, but yeah, her becoming a
no, I did think so.
She just.
Sorry,
I'm
probably going to annoy lots of fans by not knowing that, but
why? I mean, why would we know it? And the thing is, these films have to stand alone anyway, so it's fine to ask what's in comics, but whether they adhere or not. It's like I've said, we're going to cover X-Men one day, and how comic book accurate it is in that particular case isn't going to be a big stumbling block for me. It is sometimes. It just depends on the property.
It depends on the creative team.
She kills the main, not the main bad guy, but the main henchman. Kisses Eddie to transfer Venom back to him. And then we head off to Act 3, basically, which I think we can whip through quite quickly because it's...
Yeah, it zips along.
It zips along, but it's not that
basically, yeah, Drake and Riot are basically going to sort of set up setting the launch for this spacecraft. And then...
To go and bring back more symbiotes, I think. Yeah.
And then kills all his team.
Yeah.
And then it's like, fine, I'll just jump on it while, as the countdown's going.
It's a little bit Thunderbirds Argo, but not quite.
Yeah, I just don't know why he's not already in the suit, like on the space shuttle already. Why, But anyway, that was one part that I just thought was a bit. I'm not quite sure of the plan.
No, but it's something to do with going and getting more symbiotes, which is obviously quite dangerous to Earth and humans. Because obviously when they're not a match, you die, and when they are a match, you don't have, you could be bonded with anything. But I really don't want to say much about Act 3. Eddie is trying to stop this thing taking off, and it ends up with a big battle in the dark between Venom and Riot, Riot's a little bit bigger, and there's a bit of sort of purple in his colouring, but they're very similar to look at, and it's all a bit messy. And there,
the worst part is you see the CGI faces of both Riz Ahmed and Eddie Brock, don't you? And Tom Hardy. It's just It just looks
naff. Their ambition is greater than their sort of pocketbooks. They don't have enough money for this. And again, you've stuck Dark. I know you do it with Batman and others, but this is a particularly bad example of a sort of shiny, gloopy black thing against a black background, and it doesn't really work.
No, the visibility isn't really great. I mean, they've tried to include, like, there are some, like, silver threads and other sort of other images there, but yeah, it's kind of, especially because a lot of this film happens at night as well. And yeah,
basically ends up with Eddie killed, but Venom reattaching and fixing.
Sort of reviving.
And then they leap onto the rocket, damage the fuel line. As it explodes, Venom protects Eddie by sort of turning into a parachute. And it's never actually shown that he did burn up completely at this point. But that's what's assumed, that both symbiotes died in the explosion.
Yeah, because the symbiote sort of saves Eddie because he's had a change of heart.
Yeah, he is basically, I wasn't cool on my home planet, you know.
I kind of like it here, and I kind of like you.
Yeah. Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, in the final scenes of the film, they're debating what, you know, you can't eat bad guys and stuff like that. And he's like, you know, basically feed me and all your liver will start looking quite nice. So in other words, they'll coexist. I think it goes to Eddie and Anne sat on the doorstep to their old apartment where Anne still lives, and they're quite friendly now. He's been offered his job back, but he's turned it down to sort of be freelance. We revealed that Venom is still there. And not to say anything to Anne. He walks away, bumps into Eddie, to Stanley cameo, both, who refers to him as both of them. And then they just walk around having a bit of chat about what the ground rules are, and what they're going to have to food. And then he goes into the store where there's another robbery from that guy.
And he tries it on again, doesn't he?
And they decide to sod it, I'm Venom, and they do kill him.
Teaches some lesson.
Although we see him walk out and there's no blood or damage or anything on the floor behind him.
It's implied that he just swallows them whole.
Yeah, quite.
Yeah, we just kind of see him go, when you see kind of like Venom go towards him, and you just kind of there's a cut right there, and you just sort of think, oh, so it's implied that.
Yeah, and then he's like, I've got a parasite. Yeah,
he sort of shrinks back after him. It's like, I got a parasite. It's like, how many times I say that line? It's like an iconic line, but still.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it is. But
along with what was the other one is like heart, lungs, pancreas. You know, so many snacks all of the time, which is like another classic line apparently. But it's just it's literally one of those films where it would make a good drinking movie. Like if you take a shot every time he says that line, you get hammered.
Yeah. Then the mid credits is Eddie going to the prison to interview a serial killer there, Cletus Cassidy,
the crazy hairdo,
who says when I'm released there'll be carnage.
Dun dun dun. Boom. A line full of foreboding.
And then you say there was a clip of Into the Spider-Verse that must have made it so long. But is it one continuous clip or is it a bit of a show reel?
It's one continuous clip. It's just a bit where he's like, it's at the the ends at the grave, or he's like sliding along and there's like I can't remember too well, but I think
Yeah, okay. So final thoughts on this, really quite efficient. And as we've talked through it, I'm a bit more respectful of the structure than I had been. It does miss Spider-Man there. It does miss even that sort of visual. Because there is a bit where Michelle Williams sees Venom holding like one of the cops or security or whatever. And the size differential is immense. And that would have been kind of cool if it's Spider-Man. But so the storytelling's efficient. The lead's good. It could have been a lot worse. It's a little bit rote, it's a little bit perfunctory, it's a little bit paint by numbers, but it doesn't do anything seriously wrong. I'm a bit baffled as to, I can't see it being many people's sort of favourite superhero film or anything like that, although I'm sure some people really like it. But there's not an awful lot wrong with it either. It got terrible reviews, mediocre's the watchword here. It's okay.
Yeah, I think that's a bit harsh. I was reading a lot of like 2 and 3 star reviews. It's like, well,
no,
it wasn't terrible, but
that's about where I'd put it, to be fair. And again, if it's a 2-star, it's probably rotten. So maybe, but I just think it's added up to an overall image of a right stinker, and it's okay.
Yeah, it's not as as you said at the top. It's kind of it sort of became fashionable for a while to rip this film a new one. It's like, well, that's not really the case.
Sometimes, I think, critics don't really give something its fair dues, and when they already decided not to enjoy it, it's already kind of, you know, unless it does something like really like special or pull something that like a really like a real surprise out the bag, then it's end up going to, you know, get a negative review. You know, it's fine. You know, it's actually quite lean and enjoyable. It's actually, you know, largely because of Tom Hardy. He gives a really sort of kind of a balanced comedic performance, which makes you laugh, and you know, some of the action is pretty good. You know, some of the special effects not so much, but
the mid film action sequence is actually very good indeed.
Yeah, and you know, but the real selling point is Tom Hardy, you know, as Eddie Brock and Venom, and the reaction
and
stuff.
Engaged. Yeah, and engaged. He doesn't play it like it's a paycheck, which worried me at the outset when he said all the good stuff was cut out. I thought, well, your heart's not been in this film then.
Also, yes, there must be like a ton of stuff. So it's probably mostly because of violence, I would have thought.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's probably an R-rated cut of this.
Yeah, there probably is somewhere along the line. Might be somewhere online. There is on the cutting room floor is an R-rated movie.
But yeah, that's pretty much all I want to say. Really, it's a lean, mean killing machine.
But well, it really is. You know, I think that's right.
What did you think, Becca?
I kind of enjoyed it. I mean, for all its faults, yeah, it's okay. I would say it's a solid. I don't know. I started giving star ratings recently. Probably 3.5 stars, definitely. Tom Hardy's always brilliant. Quite like whatever he does, really, even if he does sound a bit funny. Not sure about his accent. But at least I can understand what he was saying. Compared to like Bane, for example, where he is quite muffled, obviously.
He is shit at doing American accents, you know.
Yeah, but God love him, he does try, and he still puts on a good show anyway. Short run time, you know, really works in its favour. Whips along at a really brisk pace. Only sort of downfall really was kind of, we didn't really get. I mean, obviously setting in San Francisco, didn't really get a sense of the city, but it's just nice to kind of have a comic book movie that's not New York or not a New York-esque type city. Obviously San Fran pops up a lot of, you know, it pops up about 3 or 4 times in the MCU, which is always good to see. Some great action scenes, as Sarah mentioned, kind of like the fight in the apartment is like the midway action scene is probably the best one of the film for me as well. I mean, despite some kind of ropey SFX shots, but generally it's quite good. I think the Venom suit is kind of is really effective, especially there's that scene towards the end where you kind of see him and sort of see Eddie kind of encased in the symbiote, I guess, which looks particularly effective. And any scene like involving like long tongue is very freaky. I'm glad I didn't see that film in 3D at the cinema.
I'm glad they put that in because it is kind of the grotesque thing about the.
It really is. It really is.
Gotta have the mouth, the tongue.
It helps to kind of cement that. So when we announced that we were recording our review of this film, that's the gift that you put out on our Twitter feed there, and I think that's another iconic aspect about the character as well. Obviously, as part of his like grotesque appearance, as well as he's kind of got these extending limbs that can do whatever. He's also got this really gross tongue that kind of goes here, there, and everywhere. It reminded me a little bit of. This just popped into my brain. This will sound really stupid, but the animated movie Ferngully, for example, say like the villain, I think played by Tim Curry, who's kind of basically like pollution, like a lot of slime and smog and just general nastiness, and just the way that Venom's limbs are kind of animated and they move along, they're kind of like slithering along and just like they just cover everything in its path. That's what it just reminded me of a little bit. Just literally popped into my brain, so excuse that as an unexpected laugh for people there. But yeah, it was okay. 3 stars. That's all I'm going to say.
And that was Becca's
star That was my 3-star review. I don't know why I started doing that. It's not really a thing.
Yeah. We did have an idea for Becca's hot bedroom tips, but it's not remotely what you think it would be, and we don't want to like just tease you pointlessly. It genuinely does fit some advice we were given, but it's not what you would think.
I've got another hot bedroom tip for you as well. Apparently,
It was actually tips for what to do when your bedroom's hot. That's all.
it's really hot right here in the UK and England right now. It's quite warm weather, having quite warm weather.
Yeah, and Becca
So we're
was
sort of
saying,
discussing
"Try this."
The thing is with Dave, even explaining it in a genuine sense, it still doesn't sound any better. It's like Becca's hot bedroom. But
Like the least sexiest thing ever.
what do you do when you want to cool down your hot bedroom? Well,
Take all
would
your
you like
clothes
to know?
off and then try to do something to take your mind off it.
I like to be fanned. I like to
What
get
do you
cool
do?
ice cubes and then put them in my mouth.
Hold them down, my moist skin.
I like to take a nice cold drink and put it against my face.
This is turning into a Farshay sketch. There.
Brilliant.
Anyway, moving on. Chris, what did you think?
I've already given my.
I know.
She's been flustered with all this bedroom talk. She'll ask me in a minute.
There.
Thing is, I've met Becca. I know
Well,
she's
yeah,
actually,
well,
she's red as a fucking beetroot right now, laughing at this.
Well, I'll tell you what, Becca. I actually don't know what the fuck I'm talking about because I've just talked about this film and I don't remember anything. I can't think of anything to say.
Yeah, I mean, either I was actually trying to turn the subject in a lewd direction to cover my genuine lack of knowledge about the film.
If only we had like someone else on the podcast who was really embarrassed by.
Perhaps someone who could provide some erotic facts about the film, or not. Her choice. What do you reckon, Becca?
No erotic facts, unfortunately.
Have you got facts about how to cool down one's bedroom?
Starring
I do.
Tom Hardon.
Top Hardy. I could have done Hardy facts. I really could have done, but I thought no. Yeah, obviously trying to find out facts about this film. Not particularly fun. But yeah, some facts about if you want to cool down, if it's hot at night and you want to cool yourself down. Hot tip from my dad, apparently, get a pair of socks, put them in the fridge, and then wear them before you go to bed. And apparently it cools you down.
I'm actually going to try that.
Yeah, I thought I might try that as well, see what happens. But
I'll probably get some dodgy looks from a girlfriend, but yeah.
So your partner might be like,
Yeah.
what are you doing? They try to foot you in bed, she'll be like, oh, it's freezing. Another one would be to take a hot water bottle, obviously fill it with cold water, pop that in the fridge right now before you go to bed, and then just take it with you to bed, give it a cuddle, and apparently that cools you down as well. I've not tried that, but I regularly use them anyway for my back, so that's why I'm extra warm in bed.
Yeah, my girlfriend has the same thing.
But it might be handy. You can buy just the little ones and to put down your trousers. So I don't know if that would help. But anyway, fun facts about this movie. Fun fact number one. Apparently, Mandalorian star Pedro Pascal and former Doctor Who actor Matt Smith were also considered for the role of Carlton Drake. So that could be quite interesting. Fun fact number two, as I mentioned earlier, Tom Hardy kind of took the lead role in this film, as apparently his son Lou was a really big fan of the character, and where Tom Hardy didn't know a lot about the character, his son was like, oh yeah, he does this and does this, and was able to help him out and inform him a little bit, and he agreed to do this film because obviously it was a compromise, because he usually acts in quite like violent, really adult films, but he agreed to be the lead in this film because of the PG-13 rating, so it was a compromise, and it was a film that he could let his son watch, which is quite nice. Fun fact number three, both Tom Hardy and Jenny Slate obviously played characters in DC Universe. Obviously, Tom Hardy is well known for playing Bane in Dark Knight Rises, and Jenny Slate also voiced Harley Quinn in the 2017 Lego Batman movie, which is an absolute scream. I can highly recommend it. It's so funny.
She's also dated Chris Evans, Captain America.
Oh, so she did. Claim to fame. How about that? So yeah, crossing all the divides, all the universes. Fun fact number four. This is not political in any way, shape or form. Obviously Eddie Brock and Dr. Scatter chat via the I can't pronounce it, QQ, I'm just going to call it QQ, platform on their phones, obviously owned by Tencent, which is a huge Chinese tech media conglomerate, and produced this film as well. They've got exclusive rights to distribute Sony movies in China, and have offices in San Francisco where this film is set. Fun fact number 5, Venom actually ranks number 22, not number 2, but 22, as the greatest comic book villain of all time in IGN's list of top 100 comic book villains. So that's my 7 facts, which is crazy.
That we've facted out.
And then an extra fact from you, Chris, so 8 facts. So yeah, get your money's worth this week.
We didn't spend anything, so...
Considering it's free.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, okay. You wouldn't get a refund from us, believe it.
No. Sorry. Exchange? Credit note?
Exchange? Credit note. That'll
Doesn't affect your statutory rights.
It'll entitle you to 1 free podcast the following week. Okay.
I spat out my water.
As for social media, you can find me at the Pastor Kid 1976 on Twitter.
You can find me on Twitter at Cinetronics. I'll say that again. You can find me on Twitter at Cinetronics, and you can also find all the old episodes at cinetronics.uk.
You can find us on Twitter at Expect Us to Talk. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Podbean, and anywhere else you like to get your podcast from. You should type in Do You Expect Us to Talk, find us on there, and don't forget wherever you can find us to rate us, review us, to like us, and share us. Thank you.
And where are you, so people can come and find your hot bedroom tips?
Oh God, yeah, you don't want to find those. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think the one thing, just before we sort of run into next week, I think next week is a watershed in a lot of ways, and I think one of those things is, I think Chris hit on something where he said that, I think it was Chris who said it, that this film carried a little bit of ill will when it came out, and some of the reviews, the number of, or the venom, no pun intended, of some of the worst reviews was probably brought by the fact that at this point Sony really didn't have any goodwill with the fans, and I think the whole idea of them expanding their bit of the Spider-Verse, I think there was fear that it would damage the Marvel Cinematic Universe, that it was a bit desperate and a bit flogging a dead horse, and that their track record with the previous 3 Spider-Man films suggested that maybe they just didn't really get the character or have much care for it. And I think what changes that is what's coming next week. Which means, Becca,
Do You Expect Us to Talk will return with Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse.